Well, good morning, everyone. Also, a very warm welcome from the side of SDC. We have a very interesting plenary with excellent speakers, and I'm happy to moderate this first plenary. As you might have seen from today's program, this plenary will address the topic of a healthy diet. Of course, we all wish to live a long and healthy life. And in that sense, this question is very relevant to all of us, isn't it? But what's a healthy diet today? How much sugar, how much fat, how much meat are we allowed to eat? Should we drink milk? How much? Should we drink fruit juices? Do we answer all these questions from a public health perspective, or do we rather answer it from the perspective of individuals with different needs? Discussions around these questions have gained a lot of importance over the last decade, I would say, with the fact that overweight and obesity has increased a lot, and consequently also non-communicable diseases. In this plenary, we would like to provide two different perspectives on these questions of a healthy diet. And we will, on the one hand, have by Francesco Branca, the director of the Department of Nutrition for Health and Development at WHO, a policy perspective. And in a second talk by Professor Hannelore Daniel, rather the scientific perspective. So thanks a lot for both of you to come all the way to Lugano, and I'm very happy and proud to have you here. Before I introduce the two speakers, some housekeeping rules. The speakers will have 25 minutes for their talks, and I would like to suggest that if you have understanding questions, then ask them immediately after the talk, but keep your deeper questions and questions for discussion for the discussion after the two talks. So now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Francesco Branca, who has graduated in medicine and surgery and specialized in diabetology and metabolic diseases at the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Rome. And he obtained a PhD in nutrition at Aberdeen University. He has worked then as a senior scientist at the Italian Food and Nutrition Research Institute, where he was leading studies on the effect of food and nutrition on human health, but also on the impact of public health nutrition programs. From 2003 to 2007, he has been the president of the Federation of the European Nutrition Societies. Since 2008, Francesco is the director of the Department of Nutrition for Health and Development at WHO. In his function, he is responsible, together with his team, to establish new nutrition guidelines, and he was also he has been leading the preparation for the second international conference on nutrition. So a very warm welcome to you, Francesco.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation and for the opportunity to come and meet you. Thanks to the host. They are all very good partners for WHO. And today I'd like to tell you, first of all, that unhealthy diet is one of the top risk factors for death and disabilities in the world. You see, it's number 2 in this very interesting analysis of the global burden of disease. The effects of unhealthy diet, which are obesity and maternal and child undernutrition, also feature among the top risk factors. So what we're dealing today with is one of the challenges of world development. Malnutrition comes in different forms. It comes in the form of undernutrition, it comes in the forms of vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and it comes in the forms of overweight and obesity. And these different forms are often present in the same country, in the same community, sometimes in the same family, and throughout the life of the same individual at different stages of the life course. So we need to discuss nutrition comprehensively. Clearly, obesity has been one of the emerging challenges. You see here how rapid the increase in the number of people with overweight and obesity in the world has been in the last years, and particularly how rapid this is in low and middle income countries. So what is a healthy diet? WHO says that healthy diet has to start very early in life. It has to start with breastfeeding in the first 6 months. It has to continue with breastfeeding until 2 years and beyond with adequate complementary feeding. And then this healthy diet should be a diet which is balanced in energy, a diet with an adequate content of protein, and a diet which doesn't have more than 30% of energy from fat, good quality fat, mainly unsaturated, a diet which has carbohydrates, but mainly complex carbohydrates, and doesn't include too much of the free carbohydrates, particularly free sugars. That shouldn't be more than 10% of energy, preferably 5% of energy. A diet which is rich in fruit and vegetables, and a diet that does not contain more than 5 grams of salt per day. So that's what a healthy diet is. But let me go a little bit in the specific of this different element. So let's start from early nutrition. Why do we need to breastfeed? Why do we need to exclusively breastfeed? That exclusive breastfeeding saves 820,000 lives every year. Unfortunately, the exclusive breastfeeding is not the main opportunity that all children have. We have about 40% of children under 6 months who are exclusively breastfed. So we're missing a lot not doing that. You see, the reason for that is the exclusive breastfeeding would prevent deaths from diarrhea, would prevent respiratory infection, and would actually bring down admissions to hospital. So can you imagine the savings for the health service to have exclusive breastfeeding? But exclusive breastfeeding also has important impact long term. It can prevent overweight and obesity, can prevent other non-communicable diseases such as type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and it has improved intelligence. The human capital will be improved by having good early nutrition. We calculate that breastfed children are smarter. You know, there's a 5 IQ points benefit. The longer the breastfeeding, the bigger the gain in intelligence, and also the school performance is there. And you see this on the right side, the systematic review looking at the meta-analysis looking at the effect of breastfeeding in the prevalence of overweight and obesity, and is estimated to 10%. So that's early nutrition. Fats. Why do we need to keep the fat intake low? Well, mainly for the control of weight. This is actually an extract from systematic reviews that WHO has commissioned back in 2012. You know, this is looking at populations who have been consuming different types of different amounts of fat, and randomized control trials in which populations have groups of populations have been compared as to their fat intake, and you can see that the effect is there. It's significant, and it's not a big effect, but still, you know, about on average 1.5 kilos, which on a population basis can be actually quite important. But certainly, the lower the energy from fat, the better the control of weight. So a marginal effect of keeping your fat intake low, but then the quality of fat. Now, first of all, saturated fat. You know, the saturated fat are the fats that are contained in a lot of the dairies, in the meats, but also saturated fat in the vegetable oils. This is the palm, and this is the coconut. Actually, the coconut has a lot of saturated fat. Recommendation of WHO is that whenever you have saturated fat intakes higher than 10%, you should bring it down, both for adults and children. And we're having what we call the conditional recommendation, depending on the context in which this is implemented. These are actually draft recommendations that are going to be published very soon in WHO. But we are suggesting that the intake of saturated fat is brought to less than 10%, and that the replacement come from unsaturated fat, better the polyunsaturated fat, which are the fat that, for example, are contained in soy oils or canola oils or safflower oils. Then we have another category of fat, which is called the trans fat. The trans fat are present both a little bit in the dairy, let's say about less than 2% of the energy usually comes from that. And a lot of the trans fat are actually coming from industrial processes. So, they've been invented to replace the butter. So, they're done with vegetable oils, which are industrially hydrogenated to make them harder. So they're also called hardened fat. And so these partially hydrogenated oils usually contain this form of saturated fat, which is called trans. And you see them, well, you don't see them, but in many cases, many countries, they are labeled. But for example, in products like the croissant or certain confectionery products, donuts, crackers, biscuits, certain shortening. And overall, the WHO recommends that the intake of trans fat is kept to less than 1% of energy. And again, this both in adults and children. What is the challenge of the trans fat, for example? We have the evidence that the high intake of trans fat increases the risk of heart disease. It actually also increases the risk of disease by any cause by 34%. But we estimate that about 500,000 deaths from cardiovascular disease are attributable to trans fatty acid intake. And you see, on average, the world consumes more than the WHO recommendation, 1.4%, with some notable exceptions. Some countries have extremely high intake. We estimate, for example, that Pakistan has around 6% of energy from trans fat. Also, Egypt has high intakes. India, Bangladesh, India has a common fat, which is called vanaspati, which is, really made of trans fat. North America has traditionally been exposed to high trans fat intake, also some countries in the south. But these are estimates that actually go back a few years, and that's the challenge we often have with this type of data on the diet. The food system evolves very rapidly. And so the situation that we see here with some concern about trans fat intake could actually have changed. And so we are afraid that a lot, not only in Asia, but in Africa, has happened due to the change in the consumption of processed food. Sugars. Well, the concern that WHO has is particularly about free sugar intake. And WHO recommends that we reduce the intake of free sugars, and particularly that we reduce to less than 10% of energy. Now, where do we find the free sugars? It's actually not only the sugar per se. And by the way, white sugar cane sugar, they're all sugars. They don't have any different impact on health. But we also find it in honey. We also find it in fruit juices. We also find a lot of the free sugars added to the food that we eat. Do you know how much sugar is in, for example, the ketchup? It's an enormous amount of free sugars we found. And then, of course, the sugary drinks and the confectionaries, but also bread, certain forms of soft bread, they contain free sugar. So we see a lot of sugar that is present in the food we ordinarily consume. So that's a big challenge. Why are we concerned with free sugars? Well, we're concerned, first of all, because of, again, the epidemic of overweight. And if you consume more sugar, your weight will go up. If you consume less sugar, your weight will go down. As simple as that for adults and for children. But also we are concerned for another public health challenge, which is dental caries, which has important impact on the economics, on the, sometimes the social interaction, work capacity, and also the quality of your nutrition. So, salt. Keep your salt intake to less than 5 grams per day. And again, it's not just the salt per se, it's actually this is the ingredient table of a stock cube. Stock cubes, they contain a lot of salt. And this is a soy sauce. There's a lot of sauces, including the fish sauces, which contain quite a lot of salt. So WHO says that you should keep it to less than 5 grams of salt per day, which is also corresponding to 2 grams of sodium per day. You can also express it in terms of sodium. Again, adults and children. For children, it should be less. How much less, depending on the body weight of the children. And the reason for that is mainly blood pressure. This is again a review of all the studies looking at blood pressure, and blood pressure goes down regardless of your sodium intake. So even if you are at 5 grams per day and you bring down your sodium intake, your pressure will still go down. Both the systolic pressure and the diastolic pressure, and clearly this has a major effect on hypertension and eventually on heart disease, on stroke, and cardiovascular disease. So that's my explanation why WHO is defining healthy diet as such. But I also would like to add a couple of additional challenges. One is processed food. Processed food is increasingly the way many people in the world eat. And the growth, and this is industrially produced food in low and middle income and in high income countries. And you see, and the soft drinks, you see actually that the increase in some of these items, both processed food and soft drinks, is actually much higher in low and middle income countries. This is where the markets are expanding. And processed food, of course we have nothing against processed food per se, but processed food comes normally with a higher intake of free sugars, a higher intake of salt, and a higher intake of saturated fat, and trans fat. So this is simply flagging a concern that we have. And the other concern we have is that the way we produce the food is actually not sustainable. This is the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, the way we organize it at the moment, 24%. And look at the water. 70% of the use of water on Earth depends on agriculture. And clearly, some products consume more resources than others. I mean, you're all familiar with the calculations around meat production. I mean, production of red meat in terms of water, in terms of use of land that has to be cleared, deforested, and in terms of greenhouse gas emissions is far higher than that of, for example, poultry, and certainly far more than what we could have from cereals or other vegetables. So there's a big challenge that we have on the environment. We also have another challenge of the way we eat, and that is the waste that we produce by having food systems and food chains that are not well organized. A lot of the waste happens at the level of production in low and middle income countries. A lot of waste happens at the level of consumption in high income countries. But you see, there's about a third of the food supply which is lost. And this is certainly something that we cannot afford to continue having. So this is a long list. I put it there, and I don't know if the presentation can be made available. What can you do to have a healthy and sustainable diet? Just daily tips. Eat fresh food. Eat fruit and vegetables. Eat less meat and dairy. Have it locally produced and sourced. Have it seasonal. Drink tap water. So it's actually overall a change in the way you behave. But what we're saying, and this is the last part of my presentation, you need to have an environment which allows to make those choices for a healthy and sustainable diet. So what could be the effective programs and policies? In 2016, the General Assembly of the United Nations declared 2016 to 2025 as the decade of action on nutrition. So time-bound, let's implement a number of programs, policies on sustainable, healthy, resilient food system for healthy diets. Let's work with the health systems to provide the right nutrition services. Let's make social protection programs capable of providing the right resources for people to afford a healthy diet. Let's also work on trade and investment policies to make that food supply healthier. Let's create environment for nutrition in settings such as hospitals, schools, that are supportive of that healthy nutrition. And let's actually monitor all that. Am I doing with time? 7 more minutes. So starting early. Starting early means creating the environment for breastfeeding. So having counseling about healthy eating since pregnancy. Providing the iron and folic acid supplements through antenatal care programs to all girls and all women in the world. It means restricting the marketing of breast milk substitutes. And this is a WHO UNICEF initiative with several NGOs called NetCode. It's a network to monitor the code of marketing, implementation of the code of marketing breast milk substitutes, which we have for 35 years, but which are not really that broadly implemented. And we have really a promotion of infant formula that is not justified by the real needs that very few women really have. We would like to see hospitals which enable women to have an early good start with breastfeeding, with health staff that facilitates the initiation of breastfeeding, with prohibition of providing gifts by infant formula companies, and by having really good standards of care and keeping the children next to their mothers. Complementary feeding, the food which is given to young children less than 2 years in addition to breast milk. That has to be also mainly done by families and healthy without sugar and salt. Unfortunately, we see a complementary feeding environment which is almost like an introduction to the consumption of processed food later in life. So particularly the promotion of foods for infant and young children should something that governments should think of regulating. So there's a lot of power that public health authorities have in creating a healthy food environment starting from early in life. Second area is the offer of food. And even the formulation of food products is something that governments have the power of influencing through policies and regulations. And these two packages are promoted by WHO to work with the industry, small, large producers, to eliminate trans fat and to reduce sodium in the preparation of food. Communication to consumers. People buy processed food, but they need to know what is in the processed food. And actually, the majority of countries does not have clear nutrition labeling of products. So knowing what are the ingredients and what are the nutrients in the different products. But often, due to the complexity of reading those labels, that doesn't have an impact on choices. Recently, there have been systems that have enabled consumers to make their choices more wisely. And this is the system that they have in Chile, where they have this black hexagon indicating that that particular food is high in calories, high in saturated fat, high in sugars, high in sodium. These are systems used in the UK, traffic light for the different nutrients. This is a recent system developed in France called Nutri-Score. Each product has a grading from A to E, A meaning the best nutrient profiles and E meaning the worst nutrient profile. So people are facilitated in their choice. So that's a good thing to do. Price policies. Putting a tax, for example, on sugar-sweetened beverages, in this case in Mexico, has facilitated the choices of consumers. They have reduced consumption of soft drink. Mexicans are the country in the world that consumes the highest amount of sugar-sweetened beverages. Can you imagine? They're also used to prepare for ceremonies. They wash themselves in soft drinks. So it's part of the culture. So there's a tool here that is used to bring down the consumption with the taxation. And now about 40 countries are doing this in the world. Food procurement in public institutions, the number of meals that a government buys is enormous. So by simply deciding that, for example, in schools, the foods with better nutrition profiles are both, that does not only influence what children eat at school, but influences the whole food system. What is really produced by the companies. Marketing. Restrict marketing of foods and non-alcoholic beverages to children. Children are very sensitive, and the marketeers are very smart and very good. They use multiple techniques, not just the TV, but now more and more the internet, social media. That has to be controlled if we want to have a healthy diet. And I'll stop here, and by saying that I think there is an understanding that public policies are needed to guide choices of consumers. So people cannot be left alone to choose healthy diets if these diets are not affordable, are not available, not accessible. So let's have a clear understanding of what healthy diets is, starting from early life, but then let's take responsibility as public health practitioners, as UN organizations, as cooperation partners to allow people to have that healthy and affordable diet. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Francesco, for this rich presentation. Our second talk will be by Professor Hannelore Daniel. She holds the position of a full professor of physiology of human nutrition at the Technical University of Munich in Germany. She is a nutrition expert by background and worked throughout her career in Germany, in the UK, and in the US. Her main research interests are diet-genome interactions, and those are assessed at all levels, from genetics to the metabolome, and including the concepts of personalized nutrition. She is a member of the German National Academy of Science, a member of the German National Economy Council, and a reviewer and advisor for national and international funding agencies and the EU Commission. Hannelore Daniel has produced more than 450 scientific papers and reviews and 3 textbooks, and she owns a number of patents and is an advisor to a number of companies in the biotechnology and food retail domain. So thanks a lot, Hannelore.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Nino. Thank you, Karin. Such a diverse audience is a great challenge, but it's also fun. Okay, let's touch ground. We move into the world of genome-environment interactions. Food, diet, health, and longevity is my subject. I will have 3 parts. One touches on this wonderful presentation of Francesco, builds a little bit of the science background for some of these recommendations, in particular then when I move to the salty part, and I will end up with concepts of personalized nutrition. So, who are we? We are that. Turn around, look at your neighbor, the person behind you. You are identical by 99.8%, genetically speaking. And you see how diverse we are. So, all those differences come from 0.2% of genetic variation all across the different human populations. 3 billion letters make this. And that is the plasticity of the human genome. It's not a scientific paper, it's Sports Illustrated, the top athletes in all the different disciplines. And they have, by 99.8%, identical genome. Isn't that fantastic? And of course, you're as different inside as you are on the outside. And that are all the metabolic pathways that make our metabolism to go, that make our life from the first day to the end. So there's a human genome, we have the genetic information on that, but you're allowed to talk in plural now of you, say we, because you're a metagenome. On top of your own genome that is found in your nucleus of every cell that has a nucleus, you have a microbiome with 400, 500, 600, 800 different species. And that is quite a substantial part of your body. If you think in your large intestine, yeah, you have this 500 extra species living, contributing to your metabolism. So, you are more than one in terms of genetics. You're a metagenome, and you're a metagenome exposed to an exposome. And the exposome is everything. It's not only diet, it's also all kinds of other environmental challenges, drugs and coffee, but also exercise and things like that. So your genomes and your exposome are in an interplay every single second of your life. And the outcome is your phenome. But even the phenome has been changing, and the phenome is changing. That is human evolution. Yeah, from here to here, we talk about 2.5 million years. 2.5 million years of genome-environment interactions. and 2.5 million years in an environment where you had to struggle for food. You had to struggle for calories. You had to struggle for the vitamins and the trace elements and all the essential things that make you to work if your body is healthy. 2.5 million years as hunters and gatherers. Neolithic revolution took place about 10,000 years ago for the good and the bad. The good was there was enough food for most people on the planet. So this struggle for food, in the end, for the majority of people on the planet, is over. The product you see here, we won by an increase in our body mass index. And Francesco gave you the basis of how it comes. And I would argue you should be surprised because you're still carrying a hunter and gatherer genome inside of you, forcing you to pick up every single calorie that you can find because you don't know whether it will be there tomorrow. You better get it today. But then you end up there. And I guess for the first time in the human race, we have the dream of living to eternity. There was actually never real pressure on longevity, genetically speaking, in evolution. That's something new for the human race. But of course, you already learned, long life is not the thing that you should go for. It should be a long, good, healthy life, a long, healthy lifespan. And I will give you later the secret of that. Now, you have already seen this graph. I blow it up here. That was published last year, an updated version in The Lancet, the global burden of diseases. It's still up there, number 1, tobacco smoking, high blood pressure, high body mass index, physical inactivity, alcohol use, and there comes a diet low in fruits. So diet is part of this disease burden. And I will address some of the issues, and I'm glad that Francesco already mentioned diet and health is only one trajectory. It's also diet and environment that we have to worry about. And that is a Nature paper that put it in a nice perspective here. And you see what Francesco mentioned, the greenhouse gas emissions here for the different food items and food products. And that is a green world here. And if we move to fish, in particular then to the red meat that he mentioned, you see what environmental impact our diet has. And they compared here a vegetarian diet to a pescatarian, which is vegetarian plus fish, and a Mediterranean diet. And if you look here, reduction in relative risk for type 2 diabetes, if you are a vegetarian, that is the best thing you can do. It's less pronounced for a Mediterranean, but the Mediterranean still is a good diet to live on. And you see the effects for other endpoints here, such as cancer or coronary diseases, is not so convincing in terms of difference between vegetarian and Mediterranean. And the shocking part is even vegetarians die. So it's currently the best thing we can recommend. And Francesco gave it in all the facets. And that is a paper published by the Harvard group showing as longer as you exercise your Mediterranean diet, as more you benefit. You see then your hazard ratio goes down in a time-dependent manner. Coming back all those recommendations of WHO and all the other agencies have a scientific background. And I'm coming now to genetic heterogeneity, and I will use salt. So that was a salty part. And you see, high salt or high sodium intake is a risk factor. No doubt. And it's closely linked biochemically, but also epidemiologically, to cardiovascular diseases. No doubt. But, yeah, there's a genetic dimension to blood pressure, and there's an environmental. What a surprise, huh? The relationship between major cardiovascular events and salt intake, respectively sodium excretion, which you can measure in urine, and which is a surrogate of salt intake, is a J-shaped curve. Yeah, so you see there is a point where no effect is observed, and as you increase salt intake, which means you excrete more sodium in urine that you can collect and measure, as higher is your risk. But there's also a low end here, which means if your salt intake is too low, you are at a modestly increased risk again. So that is epidemiology. Just for the Europeans in the audience, there's a nice platform, Health Promotion and Disease Prevention, a knowledge gateway put up by the European Commission that provides all the different recommendations, now shown here for salt intake. But it also gives you an estimate of the salt consumption throughout Europe. And I've been just putting up the German numbers here and the numbers from Switzerland. And you see the men are around 10 grams per day, the women are between 7 and 8 grams per day. So there are gender differences in diets as well, no doubt. And that is genetics. And you look at the so-called Manhattan plot. With the blueprint of the human genome, of course, we now could ask, are there genetic variants in the human genome that pose an increased risk to individuals for obesity, for diabetes, for cardiovascular disease, for blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And we have seen fantastic signs emerging in the last 20 years. Spectacular papers, billions of euros, dollars, yen, and the effect for public health is pretty limited so far. Yet, I don't think it was a waste of money. It produced good science, but not necessarily for the benefits of the people on the street. It may turn out 20 years or 30 years from now, but not yet. So, Manhattan plots identify individual genes, loci, in the genome that link your individual risk to an endpoint such as a cardiovascular disease. The upper part is systolic blood pressure, the lower part is diastolic blood pressure. The number of individual gene variants that contribute to your risk is growing and growing as larger the populations under study become. It's currently, for blood pressure, about 500 different loci. And that is a very recent paper from this year, published in Circulation, showing you if you take, in this respect, in around 280,000 people, 300 different gene variants, and classify people according to the number of risk alleles into 3 categories, yellow, blue, and red. And red means they have the highest number of individual risk alleles. You're still an effect of the environment. And that means if you have a high genetic risk, you better should follow a low-risk diet, which means you benefit if you have a favorable lifestyle. Your blood pressure is lower. So if you are the most unlucky person of the planet because you didn't choose your mom and your dad correctly, and you inherited all risk alleles, follow a healthy diet and have a healthy lifestyle. If you are the lucky person, you can have a burger more. Now that is just 2 examples of diversity. This is in a clinical setting, 24-hour, and that is nighttime recording of blood pressure in 700 people. And you see the wide range of blood pressure from 95 here to 170 millimeter mercury. And they've been looking into some of the genetic variants that have been identified. And they talk about 3 different genes only. And depending on what variant you are for those 3 genes, you can be here or you can be here. And you see, it's a pretty big difference in terms of millimeter mercury. And if you do a fantastic science, let me go back, challenge, put in those people where you record the blood pressure continuously, 2 liters of a 0.9% salt solution intravenously under controlled conditions, that's what you get. There are people that even show a decline in blood pressure in response to this high salt load, whereas others show a major increase. So that is diversity in the response. And this response is mainly at the level of your kidney in terms of the necessity to excrete the sodium. So people are highly diverse. Some people do not respond to salt intake. Some even show a small decline in blood pressure, and others show a major difference. And that is a problem for public health. Individuality on one level, public health recommendation on the other side. So it's a yin and yang. What do you do? Yeah, and of course, it's a bias in there because about 25% of the population without a problem in blood pressure has salt sensitivity, genetic sensitivity. Whereas people with high blood pressure, this percentage is much higher. So there's a built-in bias in population, means epidemiological studies, if it comes to salt and blood pressure. So a Cochrane review, also very recent, 2017, asked, how big is the effect of a reduction in salt intake by half, or down to the HWO recommendations that Francesco explained. The good thing is, a person that has no problem with a high blood pressure, following a low sodium diet doesn't do any harm. But it doesn't do any major effect either. And that is why it doesn't do any harm. So you have a lowering of 1 millimeter mercury. But you can have 5 millimeter mercury lowering for a person with high blood pressure. So since it doesn't do any harm for normal tens of people, it's a good recommendation that the population should save some salt and reduce intake. Yeah, there was a science paper about 10 years ago saying the political science of salt. And salt has, and salt intake will be a controversy. And it just happened 2 weeks ago again. I'll show you the data. And that is very interesting because it also asks, what is science doing these days and how does science deliver something to society for the good? How political is science. That should, of course, be in the first place all science-based, what we say. And that was a meta-knowledge analysis of the salt controversy published in the International Journal of Epidemiology and published 2 years ago, doing a very careful analysis of 630 different authors from the fields, from the believers and the non-believers. And the believers mean low salt makes a beneficial effect on blood pressure and cardiovascular diseases as compared to the non-believers of that. And the colors here show you it's a little bit of a biased world. Supportive people cite supportive, and that is the bluish here. Contradictory citing contradictory is red. Inconclusive citing inconclusive, there's a bit of yellow in here. And a cross category, well, the good thing is there are some green lines. So there's a bias even in interpretation of science. And of course, it challenges institutions like HWO. It challenges me because people don't trust me anymore as a scientist. And I was proud throughout my entire career to be considered a trustworthy person. So that was published 2 weeks ago from the POOR study all across the world, asking again sodium or salt intake. It made the media, at least in Central Europe, saying, you know, all these recommendations of HWO, etc., are wrong, because if you follow the recommendations that Francesco published, you live shorter. You don't die from a cardiovascular disease. You die from any kind of other disease. In the end, we all die. But of course, that is science. Coming back, I promised you to tell you, yeah, the secret of longevity. It's not caloric restriction, although there are many, many books on the planet. There are actually 2 fantastic monkey studies that are monkeys on a caloric restricted diet, 40% less calories, day by day by day by day by day, for decades, measured when do they die. The first study by Rick Weintraub showed there is an effect of the caloric restriction. You live longer. You not necessarily look nice, but you live longer. The second study was published a couple of years later, couldn't find an effect. So the answer of whether less calories provide longevity, question mark. But then came the red wine. And that is one of the key targets of the red wine, the sirtuin. And the sirtuin is indeed targeted by a compound found in red grapes and red wine called resveratrol. And if you Google, you're blown away by sites showing how fantastic resveratrol is. And if you don't like to drink the red wine, you get the red wine in a capsule. That is the most impressive study on the mystery of resveratrol. They have been feeding mice through their entire lifespan with diets where they added resveratrol. And they added resveratrol in quantities that translate to 10 to 40 liters of red wine per day, yeah, for a 70-kilo person. And the effect is 0. So, red wine is enjoyable. I guess we have some today. And here's the secret. It doesn't help to live long. It's your income. For an economic expert. So take care that you make enough money in life. Okay, finally, I just go very briefly through that because it's emerging. It's the end of decadence. Of course, personalized nutrition is something that only people in the end can afford currently if they have the money to live long. So that would be the concept here. Yeah, we look at your genotype. We take, with new smart devices, your food intake. We measure your phenotype with all the fantastic tools where you can measure in blood almost everything. And everything is put in a data center. You'll have neuronal networks simulating your metabolism, generating artificial honey downhill, and giving on the output side, yeah, a shopping guide, personal advice system every morning, waking you up and say, you know, today it's our veggie day. Yeah, or you go to your front door and you get your personalized menus. And I show you that is going to be reality soon, even in Europe. And of course, this whole thing can be framed with new concepts, new health providers. Yeah, so it's managing a healthy life from the first day when you're born to the end. And it could be your health insurance, but it also could be Nestle taking care of that. And actually, there is already a health insurance that offers, if you provide all the data on your personal diets, on your personal lifestyle, we adjust what you have to pay on a monthly basis. And of course, all these wonderful tools are there. The sensors that measure continuously your blood glucose level, Bluetooth coupled, genotyping on your breakfast table with this tiny instrument there. Yeah, a snapshot of your food, and the software calculates diet profiles and intakes, and of course, then you have all kinds of e-health applications. And I had the privilege to be part of a European project asking, what can personalized nutrition deliver in the end? Do people follow recommendations if they are personalized? Do people follow recommendations if they are based on their genetic risk profiles? And we did that across Europe. We had 1,600 participants. We never saw the volunteers, but we got DNA samples, we got dry blood spots for analysis, yeah, questionnaires, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a pan-European study. And we gave back individualized at different levels of recommendations. And the finals now was your genes, your lifestyle, yeah, you should, as compared to more generic advice as you would read it in a newspaper or as HWO provides it. And here's the effect. The black bar is generic, and the colorful bars are the personalized. And if we look at endpoints such as caloric intake, people addressed on a personal level reduce caloric intake more. If we calculated the healthy eating index, the effect of personalization was there. But the comparison of the colors shows you it doesn't matter whether we include genetics or any kind of other high-end technology. People don't care. But addressing individuals makes the difference. So there's an opportunity if we have better tools to target the individuals. So, last two slides. Personalized nutrition has been taken into the commercial environment. That is a startup of Campbell's soup. $30 million investment in the Bay Area in California. Habit. Yeah, Habit takes personalized nutrition now and proves it with money in the background. And that is what you get. You get your personalized menu delivered to you. And depending on how much money you invest, you get breakfast, you get lunch, and you get dinner targeted to your quote-unquote desires and your needs, if you can afford it. if you can afford it. If you can afford it. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Hannelore, for your very interesting talk and also the outlook into the future. Are there any questions of understanding to this last talk? Otherwise, I suggest that we open now the floor for the discussion. We have 20 minutes for any questions and discussions. So you're most welcome to ask your burning questions on a healthy diet.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. So my suggestion, let's say, comment or let's say question for both of the panelists for your lovely presentations. How about the eating patterns? And I'm referring to especially adults, let's say 35 plus. So great to hear about these magic bullets in terms of what should we eat, how much should we eat, but then how is the interface between patterns, eating patterns, let's say, just to throw some ideas, let's say fasting, should we fast and how often and how? Fast mimic diets or intermittent fasting or stuff like that. And to make a provocative question to Francesco, if I'm allowed, that kind of slide meta-analysis in terms of fat intake that was proportional to overall calorie intake? And then if so, how about these ketogenic diets, which somehow promote this crazy, let's say, excessive fat intake? Thank you.
Thank you also for both speakers for a very nice presentation. If we go once a little bit beyond the technical aspects and the scientific aspects, or basically also have more look into social dimensions. Can you say something about that in terms of, you know, eating and drinking has also very strongly social network dimensions, being together with friends, and to what degree these many different studies do take into account of these dimensions, which are, in my opinion, also a very essential dimension of quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very provocative discussions, I guess. My question to Dr. Branca, with regards to moving appropriate nutrition across the board, LMICs face a particular problem because when people come with money, they can sell anything. Just in Kenya, I think last month, we had adulterated sugar. They say it has mercury dumped in the country. There's a big corruption going on. But the guys who brought it, nothing will happen to them. So I'm just wondering, in terms of fostering legislation as to what multinationals can do, you talked about advertising, say, baby formula, et cetera, I am a parent, and there is nothing that helps guide parents to not give their children baby formula, etc. And a quick one to Dr. Daniel. I just, the last bit of your talk is a little scaring, this personalized nutrition. What it suggests is turning me from a human being that enjoys what I eat into a robot. And that for me is scaring, but I guess, thank you, that is science.
Okay, well, thanks for the good question. So I'll start with the FAT meta-analysis. Those were randomized controlled trials in which the study groups were divided into people having a lower fat intake and others were with a higher fat intake. So that was the only, overall they were sort of a healthy diet, and simply the proportion of fat was changed. And the purpose, these were studies aiming at different objectives, but not at losing weight. These were studies usually lasting for maximum a couple of years. And then the body weight was measured, the waist circumference and the body mass index, and these different studies were, by and large showing that simply the difference in energy from fat was leading to a lower body weight eventually. So they were not fancy diets. They were not meant to lose weight. Certainly the ketogenic diet were not part of those studies. We, as WHO, we have not looked at what is called the nibbling versus the gorging, or whether you have to have regular meals or having fasting days. So we don't look at that. We certainly look at the concept of dietary pattern, because what we've done so far is looking at the different nutrients. But people don't eat nutrients. People eat food. And another question was about the social dimension. That social dimension is actually very important, because often Hannelore mentioned the Mediterranean diet. I come from that Mediterranean background, and for me, in a sense, it's easier to have a relatively healthy diet, because that dietary pattern contains a lot of recipes which are in line with those recommendations. It by and large contains much more fruit and vegetables, and less fat and a bit more fish. So those dietary patterns are useful. There's not a single dietary pattern in the world that is the best one. So Mediterranean diet is good, but there's a lot of other good diets. I mean, certain aspects of Asian diets, for example, are interesting. Certain African diets. We actually, FAO has looked at the diets in different African countries, and look at actually the adherence to the healthy diet concept in African countries is much higher than you have in other parts of the world. So that social dimension is important to guide people's choices. So you don't have to have your computer deciding for you what to do, but it's something coming from the tradition. Is also something coming from, in this regard, the sustainability is important. It's coming from what that territory is able to produce. And by the way, something that you will enjoy. I think both of us didn't mention the pleasure aspect of having food, which is not only producing the nutrients, but is
look at me.
But it's something that sustainability is also pleasure is part of the sustainability. You want to continue eating a healthy diet, but that's difficult to do. But WHO is going to look a little bit more at dietary pattern. I can anticipate that the only two things we found to advise on dietary pattern is, one is the level of processing, and the other one is the animal versus non-animal source food. And I think there's some evidence that less processed is usually coming healthier, and there's some evidence that less animal source food is usually going into a better health space. But that will come. Final point about how can people be guided. I think you're quite right. Governments should help their citizens to choose, but it's not about information. It's about what you find in the supermarkets. It's what you find in the shops. It's what you find in the schools. I think that food environment part is so important. That's why I think as public health people we have a responsibility. Clearly, the tools that Hannelore has been working with, and by the way, I have a lot of esteem for Hannelore. We were in the same project for a few times. So we have been also good partners scientifically. So I don't challenge the science of what Hannelore is saying, but I challenge a little bit the practicality of that. So Hannelore is telling us, okay, well, don't worry, you can go in this field full of holes, because we'll give you a little light on the head, and then you will avoid all the holes. But what about walking in a place where there's no holes? So why do we have to be exposed to unhealthy environments? What's the benefit of having no control about that food environment? If you live in a healthy environment, then fine. I think you have to make an effort to behave a little bit unhealthier, and then maybe you have a justification to do that. But I think we should create a level playing field, because public health is about everybody. public health is about, it's a right to have, a healthy food environment. Not everybody will be able to afford certain tools to navigate difficult environment. Who is going to benefit about those different environments? Certainly not the people. It's probably the industry that created unhealthy food environment. Thank you.
Let me comment first on the patterns, and there were keywords such as fasting and ketogenic, etc. It's not so easy to assess what people eat and when they eat and what portion sizes. So it's a problem of our science. And the old tools, quote unquote, were questionnaires. And we know if we put a questionnaire in front of a person asking, what do you eat? They cheat on us.
Sometimes.
The good thing is we know where they cheat, and we can take that into account. But there are also new emerging tools now coming because the keyword was metabolomics. If you take a urine sample and you analyze what's in there, you even can take it down to individual veggies, for example. The problem is we cannot quantify it yet, but we can tell of whether a person has been eating broccoli, yes or no, or whether a person has been drinking orange juice, yes or no, because the orange juice gives a different signature than apple juice. So I'm just saying, dietary patterns are hard to assess, but clearly they represent certain lifestyles, and they are part of the game. More philosophically, ketogenic, fasting, etc., etc. I guess it's the secret why Homo sapiens was so successful. That, this species can live on the planet in all regions possible, from Antarctica to deserts, because we can eat diverse diets. We can eat diverse foods. And we have been exposed, struggle of food, for millions of years of fasting times, going far beyond of what we would call healthy. We talk about fasting, which is actually interesting. It's part of every religion on the planet, that you clear your body, your soul, by reducing dietary intakes. So I think we are damned flexible. We can handle a huge spectrum of foods. We can be veggies, we can be omnivores, we can be almost everything in between. It's just a question of the endpoint. And the endpoints so far in evolution have been different ones than the ones we define today. So that is a problem. We cannot tell you whether fasting, intermittent fasting carried out for years, is beneficial. It depends very much on the endpoint. And then we don't have the long-term study because, again, I would call it the end of decadence. All these different diets, almost every day a new diet and a super food and a super food. That is all crap. So there are some fundamentals, and I guess you got some of the fundamentals today. And then hold on, don't worry too much. So not every diet that comes around the corner has been assessed for anything. It's just a new business plan. Social environment, no doubt, but the social dimension of our lives has changed dramatically. Large capital city, big cities, 50% are single-person households. So where is family? Where is the time that you spend with your family in eating breakfast and eating lunch and eating dinner? They're gone for the majority of the people. So peer groups have become more important, and we need to target those because now, of course, the social environment is a part of the game, no doubt. And we have to think about new concepts, in particular to reach the youngsters with new media, et cetera, et cetera. Final word on the scary robot. I'm I'm not saying we need personalized nutrition. Don't misunderstand me. I was part of the project because I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we learn, if we include all this voodoo, that people are more compliant? I didn't expect too much from including genetics. The disappointing part was, it was even less than I expected. So, I'm not saying we need that. I'm just saying we will see it. And I think science should be there when it comes. And science should be there for the good and the bad, helping to improve the concepts, but also say, listen, that is nonsense. Don't do that. It really doesn't make any sense. So coming back, the scary robot, again, the world is changing. My life is changing. I'm a robot almost every day because I'm controlled by my smartphone. For the good and the bad. And the good thing, and that is my final word, I love Google Maps. Because I know where I am. And if I want to go down to the sea, the lake, easy task. So in this respect, coming to the question, what is a healthy diet? Like a GPS system, you need 3 satellites. You can position yourself with Google Maps because there are 3 satellites. One satellite is HWO. The second satellite is your national organization that gives out dietary advice. And the third one is your gut feeling. Yeah, and try to find the balance between those 3, and then you're on a good path.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's just a quick question about the map that has been shown. We've all heard about Mediterranean diets, but I've seen that Egypt, which is a Mediterranean country, has the worst data that has been shown by Francesco. So I'm just wondering, why is it so? In terms of fat consumption, I think, or something like that.
Okay, thanks. And the second question?
Hi, yes. Yes, I was just wondering if you could comment on the impact of the food industry on shaping not just national legislation, but international policy, and not just how policy is shaped, but the way it's interpreted at the national level. I'm just reminded of, for example, Harvard published recently its healthy eating plate, where it divided everything into fruits, vegetables, and what was it, cereals and grains, and it left out dairy. And the American Dairy Association threw a fit about this. And this also reflects back on the portions that are stated that individuals need to observe. And so some people say that, well, because the food pyramid says 1 to 2 servings a day, this is what I should be taking for my health, whereas as opposed to it stating limit those portions to 1 to 2 servings a day. So also in terms of interpretation and the way that it's stated. Thank you.
Okay, I think that I showed the slide about the estimate of trans fat content in different parts of the world. So Africa was green because at the time we didn't have, this is data of 2012. I think that it could change, and WHO is actually doing a project to try and collect information about trans fat content in different countries. It doesn't connect with necessarily the content of fruit and vegetables in the diet. It's mainly about what comes from industrial trans fat. How policies are shaped, evidence informs policies. It's not, unfortunately, the only way to do that. There are often economic and social considerations, and this is done in dialogue with stakeholders, including industry. What we see is often industry interference. This is not for the purpose of public health. So that's why it would be important also to create an independent space free of conflict of interest for the public policy making.
Do you want to add?
Milk? A sentence? Adults are not made for consuming dairy products, yet they can consume dairy products. And dairy products have been so successful in the last decades. I'm coming from a dairy country, Germany, like Switzerland, that we have about 19% of all the calories coming from dairy products. So it's just a question of how much. A baby needs to digest lactose because it's the only carbohydrate in human milk. It's the sole carbohydrate source. But then it should be it. Yeah. And I can live with a recommendation to reduce dairy intake, just plain calories in the first place. We can talk about the quality of fat and all the other ingredients, but we have been doing a little bit too good on that. So maybe it's titrating, and that is good.
Okay, thanks a lot to both of you for your really interesting and inspiring talks.